can you explain what it appears that RHAP is doing?
Yeah, so it's very cool. So first of all, these like 5 different brain waves are in fact like a thing. They are sort of accurately represented. We've sort of talked about, neither of us are experts in kind of ERP, although I've certainly worked with people who are,
Mm-hmm.
and so there are different ways of sort of mapping the different brain waves in corresponding with brain activity. But this transcranial magnetic stimulation is super cool. It's technology that is very similar to how an MRI works. So it's this use of magnets. And basically, if anyone has taken sort of some high school physics, you sort of learn that magnetism and electrocurrent can sort of interact with each other, right? A changing magnet will cause a change in an electrical current. And so basically what's happening is the system uses magnetic fields to sort of stimulate the electric current that is the like firing of a nerve impulse in the brain, your neurons firing. And so it's altering the activity of your brain through magnets, basically. And so this is a technique that's been approved, particularly for things like depression, that's been really
Mm-hmm.
resistant to other medication and treatment, but it's also approved for things like OCD, migraines, helping people stop smoking. And then there's a lot of research on here, I know, for things like schizophrenia, ALS, MS. I know you talked about
Yeah.
like stroke rehabilitation. So
Yeah.
it's a very cool technique because it is non-surgical. It's an incredibly low risk of adverse events. So if anyone thinks about like electroshock therapy that you have
Yeah.
seen probably in popular movies, this is much better than that. There's a much less risk of anything
Mm-hmm.
other than like perhaps some like nausea. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, it's just a really interesting technique that has um, a lot of potential in the field right now. And it was just very
Mm-hmm.
cool to see it sort of accurately represented here. And the idea that this was a technique used to sort of realign the brain waves kind of tracks. Like it's very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, what it does is basically in a very non-invasive way, by just putting this magnet near the scalp, it modulates the potential for the brain underneath the electrical activity of the brain directly underneath the current to fire. So like neurons communicate through electrochemical signals, and this magnetic potential changes the propensity of any region to activate. And so, you mentioned it's non-surgical, it's also non-pharmacological, so it doesn't
Mhm.
have those kind of broad systemic effects and side effects that a lot of medications have. And what's interesting about the technique, for some of the clinical applications that Melissa mentioned, is in addition to just sort of trying to ramp up or ramp down activity of certain parts of the brain, you can pair the stimulation with behavior, in a way that you can help people learn things or unlearn things in a more rapid and effective and lasting way, which is sort of the idea behind using it for language and motor rehab after brain damage or stroke, because you can sort of help people by kind of boosting some of those circuits that have been damaged. You can try to help rewire them faster. And while you're doing something that's an activity that you're training that person to do, you can make your training more potent. So that's part of the idea behind some of these applications. And what RHAP is doing in this scene, and we can unpack this more on the feedback show, is she's pairing the stimulation, and she's probably trying to stimulate the brain and maybe also the severance chip, because we don't know exactly how
Mhm.
that works, like how the magnetism is altering the function of the chip. But she's trying to stimulate that while she is asking Mark to recall things from his memory, and she's asking him
Mhm.
to recall different things. And so by pairing that act of memory recall with the stimulation, she's trying to change the circuit that is that memory is tapping into. And that seems to be the idea behind this reintegration procedure, as far as I can tell. And the
Yeah.
questions that she asks him are different kinds of memory questions. And we've talked about the memory systems before: declarative memory and autobiographical memory and all of these other types of memory. But she's asking him about memories from the severed floor. So what does MDR stand for? Memories from his Audi life. Where were you born? What was your mother's name? And then she's also asking him about very emotional experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
she's trying to draw out these emotional reactions and also modulate those as part of the procedure.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So, we get this question where Mark's like, is it going to hurt? And it's like, ideally not, because, this isn't a technique that's supposed to hurt. She asks him what his mouth feels like, and he says nothing, which is
Mhm.
good. And then at one point, she's moving over the um, motor cortex, and we see his like
Yeah,
hand start to
tremor.
shake, which
Yep.
is really interesting. And then, yeah, we get this like series of questions, and we start to, it's really interesting because the brain is so, there's a lot of plasticity in the brain. It can sort of rewire and compensate for
Mhm.
injury or surgery. And so I think that it's, we're sort of trying to form new connections, sort of unaffected by the severance chip here through this process of, if you stimulate the brain, release brain growth factors, stimulate neuronal growth that
Mhm.
can kind of circumvent the severance procedure
If
and
it
reintegrate
fires
the brain.
together, it wires together, which is
Exactly.
one of the sayings in cool neuroscience circles. So, yeah, this is like a little brief stretch of like 3 minutes of the episode, but this was really, really interesting to me. It's not important that this is biologically plausible or that it works
Yeah.
out, but like I like that this was recognizable, and I recognize the effort in trying to use something that approximates technology that already exists.